This is Red Podcast, episode number 236. It takes a lot of guts to put out a podcast. When you hear this story, it's going to make your podcast seem easy.
This is the Red Podcast. How to reach more people, establish your authority, and deliver your message. Here's your host, David Hooper.
About a year ago, I was involved in an automobile accident. I was driving one direction, 16-year-old kid who'd just gotten his license 3 weeks earlier, driving in another direction. He decided to turn in front of me. Bam! Head-on collision. If you want to hear the whole story, I talked about it in episode number 214, redpodcast.com/214 for that. I mention it here because my car was totaled, and I made the commitment. I said, I'm going to see what I can do without a great car. I purchased a 1999 Nissan Altima for $1,000. I don't drive a lot. That's one of the reasons that I did that. But, this car, not really working for me. Said I'd keep it a year. I'm at 1 year. And the car's running great. Like I said, it's fine. Don't drive a lot. But I'm considering other cars, probably an electric, possibly a hybrid. And a friend of mine, he's got a Prius. He's going to be out of town for a couple weeks. He said, hey, man, why don't you drive this Prius around, see how you like it? So I took him to the airport, got in the driver's seat, and I was off. It's not flashy, nothing really exciting about it. It's kind of the official car of middle-aged men and women at Whole Foods. So I go to the gym, do my workout. I'm stretching afterwards. And it was funny because I'd been to this gym before, but this time people were talking to me just out of the blue. I'm thinking, man, that's weird. Maybe I've got this new confidence, like I'm really doing the middle-aged white guy thing, driving this Prius, and people can sense that. They sense that confidence, and they're all talking to me. Hey, man, what's up? Hey, how you doing? A lot of guys being really super nice to me. And I get up to leave, and I look down, and I see my buddy's keychain, and it's these beads, which I didn't think much of at the time, but they're the colors of a gay pride flag. And I was like, son of a bitch. I think I was kind of giving off the signal that day. That's what this episode is about. Flying your flag. I've got a woman, you're not going to believe what she's podcasting about. I heard her on a podcast called School of Podcasting. It's a podcast about podcasting. She was talking about it. And I thought, I've got to have her on Red. She is flying the flag. This lady has brass balls. This is the Red Podcast, the podcast for experts. If you've got a message that you want to spread, you want to make money with it, you want to have more people pay attention to you, this is the podcast for you. One of the best ways to fly your flag, email. It's still king. I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. With all the fancy social media that we've got, when it comes to online marketing, email is still king. And if you want to quickly build your mailing list, I've got a free resource for you to check out. Go to createyourlist.com to get this resource. It's going to tell you exactly what's working now in the world of email marketing. Createyourlist.com. Now, you know that very rarely do I interview somebody on Red Podcast. It's usually just me sharing my marketing expertise, telling you how to grow your audience, expand your influence, deliver your message. But when I heard about this woman, her name is Alexandra Harbushka. She's putting something out there that, frankly, a lot of people would be embarrassed about. Recently, I sat down with her. I wanted to have a conversation about her podcast, about why she is on this mission to spread this message. Got to warn you, if you're listening with kids, if you're highly religious, if you're weird about sex, if you're sensitive to this type of conversations, it's not vulgar. It's not pornography or anything, but it is an adult topic. If you're listening with kids, if you've got other people in the room, if you're listening at work, you may want to skip this one. Don't say I didn't warn you. Here it is. I think we need more people like you, and I'm hoping that some of that's going to rub off.
Great.
So I didn't say what your podcast was. I'm going to let you introduce that. It is somewhat shocking, I would imagine, to a lot of people when they first hear it.
Oh, you have no idea. I always have to warn people when they ask, well, what do you podcast about? I have to give them a disclaimer before I start, because it is a shock, and that's why I'm doing it, right? So my podcast is Life with Herpes, and yes, I'm talking about herpes, specifically genital herpes. It is a shock for people to hear because we have sugar-coated the word herpes. We don't talk about it in any social setting. And when we do have oral herpes, we use the word cold sore or fever blister, something along those lines, or make it into a zit or whatever. But when we're talking about genital herpes, that is something that can't even be discussed.
You know, it's funny because I've got friends with HIV, and I guess that's not funny, but
right.
It's very interesting to me that HIV somehow got some really good PR. It was a death sentence for a long time, and nowadays people don't really think that much of it. And these guys go on about their lives, and they're in relationships with other people, and it's almost like it's nothing. Now, I don't have it. I'm not in their bodies and in their minds to know what they're thinking of, but it seems to me like a much bigger deal than herpes. But herpes, it's like you need to hire HIV's PR, I think.
Right.
For some reason, it seems like it's almost worse.
I would agree. And that's exactly how it's been made to be. And I don't know that much about HIV AIDS other than probably the same amount you know. But it was such a scare in the 90s, and it was brand new. We'd never heard of it, right? And they did such a scare because you do die from it. I think it's now, like you said, almost socially acceptable, or because there is medication you can take. I don't really know. And you make a great point, David. Why is herpes this death sentence, yet it has nothing to do with dying? It's not even that big of a deal. It's just like having acne, or it's a silly skin disease is all it is. But because it's tied to having sex is the reason why it's been made to be this huge, huge, huge ordeal.
Well, let's talk about the work that you're doing, which is to not make it such a huge ordeal, to expose it for what it is. I want to talk about the fears that you had before the Life with Herpes podcast, when you're thinking, well, should I do this or should I not do it? Was there ever that discussion, or was it something that was a little more obvious to you?
Of course. Of course. I mean, because I played into the stigma too, right? I mean, when I found out I had herpes, well, let me back up. I have both. I have HSV1 and HSV2. And so just to give a little quick example and lesson, a 101 on what that is HSV1 is commonly known as oral herpes, which is sugar-coated as cold sores, fever blisters. So that's typically on your mouth. And then HSV2, which is genital herpes, is in your genitals, right? And we don't sugarcoat that one in any way whatsoever. When I found out I had oral herpes, I was kissed after a date. I was 20 years old, and I was upset, but it wasn't like this big deal. Like, oh, well, everybody has that. It's just a fever blister. That's all it is. It's a cold sore.
And when you say everybody, give the stats on how many people actually have it.
HSV1, oral herpes, 2 out of 3 people have it. So basically, that's everybody. We have come in contact with it throughout our life, right? If you don't have HSV1, you've come in contact with it at some point, whether kissing somebody, whether picking up a glass, sharing a beer, whatever it is, you've come in contact with it. It was not a big deal when I got it. Nobody really seemed to care. When I found out I had genital herpes, that was crushing. That was devastating. I was angry. I immediately felt all of my hopes and dreams, they were gone. Like I everything I've worked for is now, it's never going to happen. I'm never going to fall in love. I'm never going to, all these things. Nothing was going to happen. Or I'd fall in love, but he wouldn't love me back, or whatever it is. I felt that all these things would happen. So to answer your original question, David, was it scary? Did you get ready to launch your podcast to talk about it? It took me a long time before I could even really talk about it without getting emotional. I mean, I had to go through those healing stages and the ups and the downs and the angry and healing and all that before I could even talk about it in a normal conversation. And even still that I podcast on it, there's times where I will get a little bit shaky or emotional towards it as well, just because of the stigma. Even though I'm out there trying to break it, we still fall into that little trap of the ego, or the, your inner child comes out and is like, why are you doing this? This is scary. I had a college roommate, and when I found out I had herpes, she said, well, Alexandra, you can do one of two things. You can be a victim to it, or you can change the world. And I looked at her and I was like, really?
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, come on, yeah, right. Then people are going to know that I have herpes. And she was like, yeah, exactly. But you're a strong person and you're a fighter, and that's just who you are. And you'll figure out a way to do it. And it always sat in the back of my head. It always just kind of sat there. I thought, gosh, well, how am I going to do this? Am I going to do it? Or should I do it? Or how would I do, And lo and behold, the idea of launching a podcast dedicated to this was sprung, and I launched it in June.
What has that been like? You talked about, I guess some people knew and maybe some people didn't know. And I think about, to take it back to my HIV example, my gay friends, some of these guys, when they were kind of halfway in the closet, halfway out of the closet, some people knew, some people didn't. And I've certainly seen that in my work in the entertainment industry. Talking to them, like once they come out full force, 100%, life is so much easier because they don't have to worry. Have I already told this guy? Does he already know? Has he heard it through the grapevine? I imagine that would be somewhat liberating, just to say, forget it. Let everybody know.
There were close people to me, my parents, and obviously my fiance. He knows about it. Close friends knew about it. But in general, it wasn't something I discussed. And on that, I don't really think it is anybody's business unless you are going to sleep with them. You don't need to share that you have genital herpes or AIDS or whatever, syphilis or hepatitis C or whatever it is, unless you are going to be in a situation where the person could contract the virus or whatever it is. It was liberating, terrifying, but I think what really kept me focused on it, one, I have the absolute support from my fiance, and two, I knew that I would be helping people. And I knew that telling my story and the details and the where and when and how may be different, but the emotional struggle that I went through and that other people go through is the same. Having herpes has been marketed, has been described, has been associated with your life is over and you're a slut and you deserve this and you are the scarlet letter and you're a leper and you're disgusting and you're dirty and all those things. And you obviously did something to deserve it, is how it is associated. And I know that that's not true. With the staggering numbers out there, with 2 out of 3 having HSV1 and 1 out of 6 having HSV2, something has to change. Absolutely. And I don't, to go back to AIDS, I don't know what the numbers are for AIDS now, but I remember in high school, I had someone come and talk to us and they said 1 out of 60 have HIV or AIDS. And I remember thinking, I had 72 in my graduating class. And I'm like, wow, one of us is going to have AIDS. I can remember thinking that. Now, what those numbers are today, I don't know, but that just gives you an example of how common herpes really is, yet we're terrified of it. It's the brunt of all jokes. It's like the STD that most people are scared of because it is with you for the rest of your life. It is the gift that keeps on giving, yet it's not that big of a deal.
Okay, so you say that, and I think this is something worth discussing, especially when it comes to entrepreneurs or people who are putting themselves out online, in that we are raised in a culture, like me, I'm in Nashville, for example, the buckle of the Bible Belt. And religion, even if you're not a religious person, it changes the way people feel about things, including themselves. So you've got all that baggage to deal with. You're putting yourself out there in a very bold way. And because of the anonymity of the internet, bullying culture, we'll call it, it seems like it could be a bad combination. I'd love to know your experiences with that, because even though you seem like a person who feels comfortable with herself, that could still be a grind, I would imagine, to go up against anonymous trolls or just the culture in general.
You know, what's really interesting, David, is I haven't had any backlash. I'm sort of shocked by that. I've only heard wonderful things from the internet and the audience. Will it come? I don't know, but I've only heard positive things, and thank you for doing this. And wow, I'm so glad. Again, maybe people are saying things behind my back. I don't know. I'm sure they are, right? But I haven't heard anything to my face, nor have I been in an environment where it's like, oh, that's the girl with herpes, don't use the toilet after her, or something like that. I mean, I haven't been in that situation. Or, oh, you don't want to have a sip of her beer because, ooh, I haven't felt that. But again, maybe it's my own vision on it, that I don't feel that I'm any different than anybody else because I have herpes. I just feel that, hey, no one's talking about it, and there's so many people with it, and it has to be discussed. I would say, if in marketing or your business, if you're not being you, and you're not being bold, and you're not showing up every day as if, it's your last day, not to be morbid or anything, but if you're not showing up with that energy and excitement and, hey, I'm going to do everything I can, and this is my passion, and this is my mission, and this is my goal, and this is why I believe it, and I know why I'm doing it, and you're really crystal clear on why you're doing it, then don't bother. There is no dress rehearsal for life. And I look at having the herpes virus, and I feel like at this point it's a gift, because I have the voice and the ability to change the stigma, to change people's lives with it. And this has been my gift. And I truly believe that I'm going to help people with it. And was I ready at 28 to talk about it and change the world and go out there? No. I was crushed. I was angry. I was pissed off. Why am I in this relationship? Oh my gosh, I'm stuck in this relationship forever because no one's going to ever want to touch me again. At 34, I'm a completely different person, and I've had more life experience and more business experience. And I realized that this is me and this is who I am, and I have to share it.
One of the things that I want to make note of that I think all entrepreneurs could learn from is you are being very clear about what your situation is, even in the wording.
Yeah.
I contracted herpes. It wasn't I contracted it, or when I
got it.
Yeah.
Or the H word.
You're using that word. And I remember, and this is an interesting thing from somebody listening to your podcast, and I did that a few episodes before we were talking here, and I was listening in the gym, and I'm listening through my headphones, and for one, on my iPhone, you didn't have a cute title on your podcast. This is Life with Herpes, and it's huge on my iPhone. I'm like, man, I hope nobody sees this. And when I was listening to you, the first 30 seconds, herpes, you said it about 5 times.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I hope nobody can hear through my headphones.
Right.
They don't drop out and somebody hear. I mean, I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing what you're doing. And I think it's an amazing skill to have, to be that bold and to not apologize, because that's when you lose that connection with people. If you're kind of like, well, if it's convenient, maybe you want to buy this, or if you're not sure of what it is that you're selling. Anyway, you're just doing such an amazing job of that. I think
Thank
that
you.
lifewithherpes.com, if you're just curious about what boldness looks like, because you can't go back. Once you pull the trigger,
Nope.
You can't go back. Did you think about that? Like, I'm not going to be able to go back. It's like a naked picture. It's out there.
Yes. I mean, I did. I thought about that. And again, it just goes back to, I was so crystal clear on why I was doing this. And I feel as though I did it in a respectful way. I feel as though I did it. I had to be transparent. I couldn't just like, oh yeah, people with herpes, blah, 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 blah. I had to share my story. I have to talk about all of that life, what happens in my life. I share it, Most of the time it doesn't affect my life, but there's days that it does. And I share those stories, because if I didn't share my own stories, then why even have a podcast on it, right?
Right.
I have a marketing background, and people, in my opinion, we are so tired of the leave it to beaver type marketing. Everybody's happy and it's joyful and this will. No, life happens. Yeah, you want to portray how people are going to feel because you want to solve a problem with your product, whatever your product is. You're fixing a pain point, no pun intended with mine, literally. You want to tell your story. People want the truth. They want to hear the ups and downs because they have it too. You know, life is not always through rose-colored glasses. I have so many good days. I'm due for a bad day every now and then. And it's okay to talk about those bad days. With that being said, I don't feel I'm a negative person and I'm not living in a victim mode by any means. But share, you know, whatever it is that you are doing, and whether you're selling your knowledge or you're selling a product, you have to share those stories. You know, maybe the story of your business, you were broke, you were, you know, living in your mom's basement, and all of a sudden you had your big break with one phone call that changed your life. I mean, people want to hear that story. They want to know because there's somebody else out there with that same story.
Well, and even if they don't have the same story, they've got something similar to it, and they're scared. I was at a music business event one time, and I dropped in on a songwriting session, and the guy who was running it, he said, all right, I want somebody to come up here to the front of the room. We're going to do an exercise. And somebody did. And he says, I want you to tell the thing that you are most afraid of all the people in this room finding out about. And she started shaking. Yeah, I was feeling bad for her. And I think everybody was. We were like, oh my gosh, is she going to do it? Is she not going to do it? And eventually she did say something. I don't know if it was the thing she was most afraid of everybody finding out about. And nobody cared. And that's the thing that I've found time and time again in my own life and seeing other people. It's kind of like, to take it back to the gay analogy, you know, it's like that guy who comes out of the closet and is like, oh, really? Okay. I was wondering when you were going to tell me that. Yeah, who cares?
We knew the whole time. Yeah.
Right. I mean, nobody cares. Even if they didn't know, they're like, oh, okay, everybody's gay. I got a gay sister. Great. Fine.
Yeah.
I guess the question is like, it's kind of like going into surgery. You see, well, this surgery is not going to have any complications. Only 1 in 100,000 people have complications. But when it's your surgery, it's a little bit different. And I think that's what people get caught up on.
Well, yeah, we go back to, and I really think we go back to being a little kid when you were scared of something. You know, maybe you were the last kid to be picked for Red Rover. Maybe you were scared, whatever it is, right? And you go back to that moment, and basically that's all it is. You're scared of acceptance, and you're scared of being treated differently, and you're scared of rejection. I think that's a huge one. You're scared of failure, and then you're putting yourself out there, and you're like doing something out of the norm, and yeah, it's scary. Absolutely. I was terrified to record my first 2 episodes. I really, really was. But I did it. It took me all day to work up to it.
Yeah.
But I did it. And once I did it, I was like, oh, okay. You know, once I launched it, I was like, oh, okay, I launched it. I will say, though, if you are going to come out with something really bold and it is not the norm, it doesn't fit into the little box of normalcy, I would make sure that the people that are closest to you know about it. I think that people that are in your life, they would probably want to know. Like, for example, if you're using the gay analogy, you might want to tell your family first that you're gay before telling the world.
Yeah, they don't want to have to read about it on the internet or in the newspapers. Not that people in newspapers would care that you're gay or not, but your own version of that.
And then after that, I mean, just do it, and do it 100%. You can't half-ass it. You got to be 100% in it and on it, and I'm going to do this, and I believe in it, and here's why, and let's do this.
Speaking of identity, I'm curious to know, we talked about stages of grief earlier, and you know, it's anger, and you work through that, then eventually you've got acceptance. And I think of people that I know that have gone through a big transition, whether it's losing 200 pounds or coming out of the closet or getting divorced maybe. And eventually you don't want to be that divorce guy. Eventually you want to move on to a different relationship or no relationship, but you're not that angry divorce guy that maybe you are in the beginning. And I'm curious to know regarding your identity with life with herpes, do you feel that maybe you're ready to progress in some way, but you are being dragged back into the, like, I just found out about this, for example, or the different stages of grief because you have to talk about this so often and you are known for this now?
There were areas that I didn't know that were not healed. Now that I have to bring them up and talk about them, I have to get back to that point. So to answer your question, to get back to talking about the story of when I got herpes, that story, I had to mentally go back to that day. And I noticed the rest of the night I was angry. I was really pissed off. I was exhausted. I went back through that grieving period, but I don't go through it daily. I'm not in it daily. And I'm getting to the point now where I can kind of channel it. Like I go back to it to record an episode and then I have to leave it and I move on with my day. For the reason being, I don't want to tell it, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like, oh, it's just rainbows and unicorns and life is great. Because someone that just found out they had herpes, they're going to be like, it's not great. What are you talking about? My life is over. And I'm like, oh, it's wonderful. And you just take this and it's fine, and I'm so in love. And no, they don't want to hear that, right? I wouldn't want to hear that either. So yeah, I have to go back to that day and that phase, and I channel myself to that time, being scared or angry or shaking or whatever it is. And it's interesting when I do go to record some podcasts, some of them I'm like, whoa, that's going to be an emotional day. I can't do that one today. Like, no, I'm not in that mood today. Or some of them like, this is the day I am in this. I will record all of these that are talking about this subject or whatever it is. But do I identify with that person finding out that I just got herpes daily? No, I don't. I can't live in the past,
I think what you just said is really great advice for coaches or any kind of consulting, especially if you're working with beginners. And usually you are compared to where you are. That's why they're hiring you as an expert. But so often, like with podcasting, for example, you've done several podcasts. I've done several podcasts. It's easy for us. So we couldn't explain it very well to a beginner thinking like you and I are thinking now. You've got to get into that mindset. I do a lot of yoga. We talk about beginner's brain, beginner's mind. You go in and you approach that pose like you've never done it before. And when you do that, there are elements within that you might miss otherwise if you think that you know everything. So I think it's a good skill to develop, and you can develop through podcasting and going back into stories of your past. At the end of the day, really, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Really, 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 what is the worst thing that is going to happen with your story? I believe if you're not hurting someone, right? Like you're not physically beating them up or you're not abusing them in any way, who really cares what you're doing? If you're not hurting somebody or really hurting yourself in that matter, who really cares if you have herpes, you have AIDS, you have purple hair, whatever it is, right? You're gay, you are in a polygamous marriage, whatever it is, really, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to you? Well, let's look on the flip side of that. I would have never met you had you not been out sharing your story. And I think that's inspiring to people. Like we said, even if you're not dealing with that specific element, for somebody to come out, what I call full frontal, where you're completely exposed, it's inspiring to people because other people want to do that and they can't. They can't. I've had a lot of people approach me about this podcast, for example, and say, man, you get away with some stuff that I wouldn't feel good saying because I'm religious or I've got a family or people are going to judge me for it. Well, work around it. That's all I can say. Or don't. But don't feel bad about it. Yeah. And if you are angry about it or feel bad about it, then something needs to shift. If you're feeling like, I want to do this, but I can't, then something needs to shift internally to get you there. And it might not be today, and it might not be in the next 5 years. It could take 20 years. But I don't want to go through life being somebody I'm not or trying to pretend to be somebody I'm not. And I don't want people to go through life that way either. I mean, that's not fun. You're the best at being you.
and no one else can be you. And yes, you can have role models and people that you want to potentially emulate and, get to their level, but you will never become them. You can only become you. So just be you.
Well, speaking of beginner's mind, because you're making this sound super easy, let's go back. Let's take it back 20 years. Teenage Alexandra. Were you always this way?
I think so. I'm an only child. I do think that I've always had this bold, I wanted to be on stage. I wanted to be out there. I was always a polite child, very proper child. I went to cotillion and but I didn't really break rules, but I was bold. I had an opinion. I said it. Yeah, I was bold.
And once you have a little taste of that, do you find that you're getting bolder? That's what happened to me.
100%.
Well, wait till you're 40.
Okay.
Even more. I mean, and that's one of the things I like about the guys that have been in business for a while. It's like, I feel like I'm becoming like that old guy who just doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah.
He's wearing like sandals and socks. He's like, I don't care.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I was sitting in a meeting and there was this guy that was all buttoned up with his new suit and his tie and using all those really big words that you learn for your SAT. and I'm like, oh, dude, bro, like just unbutton it a little bit. I know this is not who you are. Like, I know you want to be in your board shorts and that's okay. Just be you. Don't try and be somebody else.
Well, if you want an example of this, go to lifewithherpes.com. Check out the first episode where Alexandra talks about how she contracted, not it, but herpes. It scared the bejesus out of me. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm married, been in a committed relationship for a while.
Yeah.
That's how intense it was for me. I was like, oh my gosh. I felt lucky. Then I thought, well, did I really, dodge this bullet? Maybe I should go get tested.
Right.
It scared the bejesus out of me. So I think that's good podcasting. I think it's boldness. I think there's so many lessons here for entrepreneurs, experts, people that are putting themselves out into the world to have people possibly criticize them. You can learn a lot from this podcast, Life with Herpes. If you listen to it in the gym, keep the screen off, keep it in your pocket. But even then, maybe somebody will approach you and say, hey, I share that too.
Share your story. And that's what people want to hear. Share your story. They're buying you, not your product.
Right. They don't want the textbook. We've all seen the textbook story of this situation and others.
We want to buy the love, the heart, the emotion, the blood, sweat, and tears. We don't really want the product. We want the emotion.
Well said. Alexandra, thanks for being here on Red Podcast.
Thanks for having me, David. This was fun.
It's been fun. I should do more interviews.
I love interviews. It's fun to have a chemistry and go back and forth. It's fun to do all that.
That was my conversation with Alexandra Harbushka. Lifewithherpes.com is her website. If you're interested in the behind the scenes of that episode and the last interview that I did, Carrie Oberbrunner, I've got a behind the scenes episode that's coming up next on Red Podcast. I'm going to talk about my interview process, how I actually conduct the interview, and what happens afterwards. Behind the scenes of Red Podcast, that's coming up next. To make sure that you don't miss it, go to redpodcast.com. At the very top, in the top left of that website, there are subscription links. You can subscribe to Red Podcast for free and make sure you never miss an episode. Pick the way that you like to get the podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you've got an iPhone, I got a link for you. Android, got a link for you. You want to listen via the web, get it via RSS, your TV, Alexa. There is a link for you, redpodcast.com. Go to the top left. If you've got questions or comments, reach out to me. At David Hooper on Twitter is the best way to get me. Thank you so much for listening to Red Podcast. That behind-the-scenes episode is coming up, so subscribe and make sure that you don't miss it. I'll see you soon.
You've been listening to Red Podcast. Never miss an episode. Subscribe now with your iPhone, Android, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.
I purchased a 1999 Nissan Altima.